Everyone thought the studio system created stars, but in reality, it created addicts. Behind the glamour shots and premiere nights, vintage Hollywood ran on pills, booze, and whatever kept the cameras rolling. While some died young with needles still in their arms, others suffered for decades, stuck with their addictions. These are the 17 worst junkies of vintage Hollywood. Stars who made the golden age shine, but were left to destroy themselves when the cameras turned off. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead once joked that her father warned her about alcohol and men when she moved to New York, but didn't say anything about women and cocaine. It wasn't really a joke. From the moment she hit the party scene in the 1920s, Bankhead snorted cocaine openly, dated extensively, and threw money around like confetti. Despite claiming cocaine wasn't addictive, her drug use was notorious and escalated throughout her career. The Alabama-born actress built her reputation on excess. She drank hard, slept around, and made herself sick fooling with marijuana and cocaine. Her parties became legendary for their debauchery, and her substance abuse was never hidden. She famously quipped about cocaine not being habit-forming because she'd been using it for years, and everyone that heard that knew it was the truth she had masked with humor. The toll became visible as she aged. Her once distinctive voice grew raspy and damaged. Her health collapsed repeatedly, but she never stopped. In December 1968, Bankhead died at St. Luke's Hospital in Manhattan at age 66 from double pneumonia complicated by emphysema due to cigarette smoking and malnutrition. Her last coherent words were reportedly, "Codeine, bourbon, Gig Young." Gig Young won an Oscar in 1969 for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? 9 years later, he was dead in a murder-suicide that shocked Hollywood. But the violence wasn't sudden. It was the endpoint of decades spent hiding his dependencies behind charm and good looks. Young had been married 5 times by 1978. Each marriage collapsed under the weight of his drinking and pill use. Friends described a man who seemed perpetually medicated, using barbiturates to manage anxiety that had plagued him since his Hollywood career began in the 1940s. The pills that were supposed to calm him down only made everything worse. By the late 1970s, his career had stalled. The roles weren't forthcoming as before, and without work, the drinking and pills intensified. On October 19, 1978, just 3 weeks after marrying his 5th wife, German actress Kim Schmidt, Young shot her to death in their Manhattan apartment before turning the gun on himself. He was 64 years old. Police found his Oscar statuette near the bodies. The autopsy revealed alcohol in his system, but it was the years of barbiturate dependency that had eroded his mental state. Friends later told reporters that Young had become increasingly paranoid and unstable in his final months. Those were the classic symptoms of long-term sedative abuse combined with alcohol. The studio system had introduced him to the pills in the first place. But by the time Young needed real help, the industry had moved on. Susan Hayward. Susan Hayward played strong women fighting addiction on screen. Off-screen, she had her own dependencies to manage. The fiery redhead built her career in the 1950s, playing characters who battled alcoholism and personal demons. However, the line between performance and reality grew blurrier as the years passed. The prescription pills started like they did for most Hollywood actresses. From the diet pills to stay thin, to the painkillers for the grueling physical demands of filming, Hayward worked constantly through the 1950s, making film after film with barely a break between productions. The studio system expected her to look perfect and perform flawlessly, no matter what it took. During one production, the pressure became too much. Hayward overdosed on prescription sleeping pills combined with alcohol. She was rushed to the hospital near death, but made a quick recovery and returned to complete the filming. The studio kept her working. Nobody stopped to ask if she needed help. By 1973, Hayward was diagnosed with brain cancer. On March 14, 1975, she suffered a seizure in her Beverly Hills home and died at 57. The official cause was cancer, but her body had been compromised by years of prescription drug use. The same medications the studios had encouraged to keep her camera ready. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power served in the Marine Corps in World War II as a transport pilot. Like many pilots during the war, he was likely exposed to the amphetamines that were distributed to keep airmen alert during long missions. The military handed out pep pills freely, and when the war ended, many veterans came home with dependencies they couldn't shake. Power returned to Hollywood as a chain smoker who smoked 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day and was probably also affected by hereditary heart disease. His father, Tyrone Power Sr., had also died of a heart attack, right in the arms of his 17-year-old son during the making of a film. The pattern was repeating itself. A routine checkup 8 months before his death had given him a bad fright, but he kept working. Studios didn't slow down for aging hearts or damaged nerves. On November 15, 1958, while filming Solomon and Sheba in Madrid, Power was stricken by a massive heart attack while performing a duel with his frequent co-star and friend George Sanders. He died before reaching a hospital. He was 44 years old. The official cause was heart disease, but decades of stimulants, painkillers, overwork, and the relentless pressure of maintaining his matinee idol image had worn his body down. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake's peekaboo hairstyle made her a star in the 1940s. Her drinking destroyed everything else. Following a string of broken marriages and long struggles with mental illness and alcoholism, Lake's career collapsed by the 1950s. The roles dried up, the money disappeared, and the bottles kept coming. She continued to be impacted by alcoholism as her life spiraled downward. Lake ended up working in dive bars, forgotten by the industry that had once plastered her face on every magazine cover. She added barbiturates to the alcohol, using pills to quiet the anxiety and depression that came with being discarded. In early 1973, she returned to the States. According to the doctors who treated her, she was already pretty far along with an acute case of hepatitis. She was in renal failure, an issue that reportedly had been missed while she was being treated for hepatitis. After years of heavy drinking, Lake died at the age of 50 in July 1973 from hepatitis and acute kidney failure. Lake died alone on July 7, 1973 in Burlington, Vermont. The once successful film star was in poor financial shape at the time of her passing, and she had few friends in her life. Not many people attended her memorial service. Her ashes remained at a Vermont funeral home until 1976. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was one of the most dazzling stars of the 1940s. With her striking beauty and electric screen presence, she became Columbia Pictures' top leading lady and one of Hollywood's most bankable names. But behind the glamour, Hayworth was fighting battles that few ever saw. The pressures of fame, brutal studio demands, and an industry that treated her like a product pushed her toward alcohol and barbiturates. As the Gilda bombshell, she was constantly expected to embody perfection. Long hours, public appearances, and relentless scrutiny left her exhausted. Barbiturates were prescribed to help her sleep and cope, and alcohol became her way of dulling the relentless anxiety. As the years passed, her dependency grew, and so did the signs of something far more sinister. Hayworth began forgetting lines, missing cues, and struggling with confusion. At first, everyone blamed the drinking, but in reality, the sedatives and alcohol were masking the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The misdiagnosis delayed help and deepened her decline. Studio executives were quick to label her unreliable, and work stopped flowing. The once radiant star found herself drifting from the spotlight, with her public image tarnished by erratic behavior and rumors of substance abuse. Her condition worsened in silence until doctors finally identified Alzheimer's. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Hayworth spent her final years fading away from public life, her mind and body ravaged by decades of pressure and pills. Hollywood built her into a legend, but left her broken when she needed compassion most. She died in 1987 at 68. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was never meant to be a typical leading man. With his unsettling eyes and distinctive voice, he carved out a unique niche in Hollywood as one of the most memorable character actors of the 1930s and 1940s. Films like M, The Maltese Falcon, and Casablanca made him unforgettable. But the roles that made him famous, those menacing, paranoid, unhinged roles, reflected his reality off-screen. After a series of surgeries in the 1940s, Lorre was prescribed morphine to ease his pain. What began as medical treatment soon spiraled into addiction. Morphine numbed the pain, but it also took control. His dependency on it worsened, and with it came paranoia, mood swings, and erratic behavior that strained both his career and personal life. Cocaine use added another dangerous layer, feeding his anxiety and deepening his isolation. Hollywood, ruthless as always, had little patience for stars in decline. As his addiction worsened, roles became harder to find. Once close collaborators distanced themselves and his reputation suffered. Lorre's weight fluctuated wildly, and his once commanding presence began to fade. The actor who had terrified audiences on screen was now haunted by his own demons. Despite attempts to regain control, the damage was done. his career dwindled, and his health collapsed under the weight of years of abuse. On March 23, 1964, Peter Lorre died from a stroke at just 59. The brilliant actor who gave the cinema chilling performances was ruined by the same system that had celebrated him. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi was the face of horror. His chilling portrayal of Count Dracula in 1931 turned him into an icon and set the standard for vampire films for generations. But fame was fleeting. Behind the cape and hypnotic gaze, Lugosi's life was unraveling. He suffered chronic pain from sciatica in the 1940s, which led doctors to prescribe morphine. Soon, the actor who had terrified millions was battling an addiction he could not control. Morphine offered relief, but it came with a heavy price. Lugosi's tolerance grew, and withdrawal brought unbearable suffering. By the 1950s, he was no longer remembered for that aura he brought to the cinema. His addiction left him frail, unreliable, and desperate for work. Major studios stopped calling, and Lugosi was forced to take roles in low-budget productions, including several directed by cult filmmaker Ed Wood. The once mighty Dracula was now appearing in cheap horror films for survival. Public appearances revealed a man diminished, both physically and emotionally. He was candid about his struggle, even checking himself into rehab, which was actually a rare move in an era when addiction was considered a shameful secret. But the years of morphine use had already taken their toll. In 1956, at the age of 73, Bela Lugosi died of a heart attack. Hollywood had celebrated his talent but offered no safety net when he fell. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge broke barriers in a segregated Hollywood. She was the first black woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress and became a symbol of talent and beauty in the 1950s. But while she made history on screen, behind the scenes, racism, exploitation, and relentless pressure were destroying her life. Hollywood gave Dandridge few opportunities beyond stereotyped roles. Even as a star, she was often paid less and denied the same treatment as her white counterparts. The weight of that injustice, coupled with financial struggles and failed relationships, pushed her toward alcohol and barbiturates. Doctors prescribed sedatives to manage her anxiety, and alcohol became a way to numb the pain that pills couldn't immediately help with. By the early 1960s, Dandridge's career was collapsing. She had been mismanaged financially, losing most of her earnings, and was drowning in debt. The studios that once praised her talent stopped calling. She was isolated, depressed, and dependent on substances that offered temporary escape but long-term destruction. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her apartment at just 42. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose of imipramine, a prescription antidepressant. Others suspected a blood clot, but either way, the result was the same. A groundbreaking talent had gone far too soon. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was one of the most glamorous women of Hollywood's golden age. Her beauty and confidence made her a global star in the 1940s and 1950s. But away from the cameras, Gardner was caught in a whirlwind of excess, heartbreak, and self-destruction. Her personal life was as dramatic as any film she starred in. Gardner's marriages, including her stormy relationship with Frank Sinatra, were marked by jealousy, fights, and chaos. The pressures of fame and emotional turmoil pushed her toward alcohol, cocaine, and amphetamines. These substances did offer short-term escape but caused erratic behavior and violent mood swings. Gardner became known for blackouts, explosive arguments, and heavy partying that often overshadowed her work. As the years went by, the consequences piled up. The once bankable star saw her career slow as directors and producers grew wary of her unpredictability. Health problems emerged, and the years of substance use began to take a visible toll. Despite occasional attempts to regain control, the cycle of self-destruction continued. Gardner's final years were quieter but marked by declining health. In 1990, she died at 67 from pneumonia. By then, decades of abuse had weakened her body and spirit. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra defined mid-century entertainment. As a singer, actor, and cultural icon, he was the face of sophistication and cool. But behind the charm and talent, Sinatra was entangled in a darker side of Hollywood life. It was one fueled by alcohol, amphetamines, and at times cocaine. His rise to superstardom brought immense pressure. Constant performances, grueling schedules, and public scrutiny led to late-night partying and substance use. Sinatra was known for heavy drinking and for experimenting with stimulants that kept him going through punishing work demands. Those habits often worsened his temper and emotional volatility, causing rifts in relationships and contributing to personal scandals. The toll on his health was undeniable. His voice, which was his greatest gift, sometimes suffered under the strain of his lifestyle. Friends and colleagues spoke of his unpredictable mood swings and moments of deep depression made worse by substance use. Yet Sinatra's immense talent and cultural power often shielded him from the same scrutiny that destroyed others. While many of his contemporaries died young, Sinatra lived to 82, passing away from a heart attack in 1998. His life was more like a contrast. He was the dazzling entertainer who seemed untouchable, yet the flawed man who wrestled with the same demons as so many others in Hollywood. Richard Burton. Richard Burton was one of the greatest actors of his generation. He was a literal Shakespearean powerhouse who conquered Hollywood with his commanding presence and magnetic performances. But even as he reached the height of fame, he was destroying himself from the inside out. Burton's drinking was legendary. He consumed staggering amounts of alcohol daily, often starting in the morning and continuing through filming. His relationships, especially his stormy marriages to Elizabeth Taylor, were fueled by alcohol-fueled fights and reconciliations. On top of the drinking, Burton relied on barbiturates and painkillers to cope with exhaustion and chronic pain, creating a dangerous cocktail that ravaged his health. The consequences were visible. His once sharp performances grew inconsistent and in turn ruined his reputation. His reputation for unreliability eventually cost him roles. Friends and directors described scenes of him stumbling on set or slurring his lines. The toll on his liver was immense, and his doctors repeatedly warned him that his lifestyle was killing him, but Burton struggled to stop. By the early 1980s, his health had deteriorated badly. On August 5, 1984, he died at just 58 from a cerebral hemorrhage. This was obviously as a direct result of decades of substance abuse. The brilliant actor, who once dominated stage and screen, was gone too soon, undone by the same demons that haunted so many of Hollywood's brightest stars. Wallace Reid. Wallace Reid was one of silent Hollywood's most beloved leading men. He was handsome, athletic, and every bit the matinee idol. Audiences adored him, and studios relied on him. But just like his counterparts, all that glamorous image was an upfront. Beneath all of it was one of the first major drug scandals in Hollywood history. His downfall began in 1919 when he was injured in a train accident while filming. It wasn't a career-ending injury, but the pain was severe. Studio doctors prescribed morphine so he could keep working. In that era, morphine was handed out easily, and addiction wasn't fully understood. For Reid, that prescription became a trap. The studio needed him on set, so they kept the supply coming. Soon, Reid was dependent. He needed morphine not just for the pain, but to function at all. What started as medical treatment turned into an addictive cycle. He would take morphine to film long hours, then struggle through withdrawal if it wasn't available. Reports from the time describe him as increasingly erratic and unreliable, missing work or showing up in poor condition. His family and friends tried to help, but effective rehab wasn't in vogue or a serious, effective thing at the time. Reid's situation became public when he was admitted to a sanitarium to recover. The press followed every detail, turning his private battle into a public scandal. The industry, worried about its image and not wanting to be associated with any scandal of any sort, gave him distance, just like they dealt with others. On January 18, 1923, Wallace Reid died at just 31. The official cause was influenza, but withdrawal and years of drug abuse had weakened his body. His death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. It was one of the first times the public saw the industry's darker side. They saw that behind all the glamour, there was pressure to perform, the easy access to addictive substances, and how quickly stars could be destroyed. His widow, Dorothy Davenport, even produced a film, Human Wreckage, to warn others about addiction. Reid's short life was one of the highlights of how Hollywood's ruthless machine consumed its brightest talents. Barbara LaMarr was once the face of silent-era glamour. Known as the girl who is too beautiful, she was the embodiment of Hollywood fantasy. She was stunning, scandalous, and always in the headlines. But her fame was built on a life spiraling out of control, and of course, drugs were at the center of it. Cocaine and morphine became her constant companions. Sources from the time reported that she snorted cocaine daily and injected morphine to cope with the relentless pace of fame. LaMarr lived hard. Her name was attached to wild parties, reckless relationships, and constant headlines. She reportedly married as many as a dozen times, and each relationship seemed to end in more chaos. The drugs kept her going, but they were also tearing her apart. Her physical health began to decline rapidly. She was often ill, exhausted, and visibly deteriorating. Still, studios pushed her to keep working, and audiences continued to adore her. Her reputation as a glamorous star hid a life of deep turmoil. By her late 20s, Barbara's body was failing. In 1926, at just 29, she died. The official cause was nephritis, an inflammation of the kidneys, but her years of drug abuse almost certainly worsened her condition and made recovery impossible. Her death was sudden, but not shocking to those who knew her. The excess that had defined her life had finally caught up with her. She had the beauty, the fame, and the adoration, but the same system that elevated her also fueled her destruction: Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney's career spanned 9 decades, from child stardom in the 1930s to veteran performances in his later years. He was one of Hollywood's most enduring figures, but behind the curtain was a lifetime of addiction, failed marriages, and chaos. Rooney started acting as a toddler, and by the time he was a teenager, he was one of the most bankable stars in the world. But fame that arrives so young often comes with heavy baggage. By the 1950s, Rooney was relying heavily on amphetamines and barbiturates. He used stimulants to stay energetic and sedatives to sleep. The intense demands of work and the pressure to stay relevant pushed him deeper into dependency. His personal life was a mess. He was reported to have had 7 marriages, numerous affairs, and repeated bankruptcies. Friends described him as unpredictable and volatile, and of course, often fueled by substances that heightened his highs and deepened his lows. Unlike many Hollywood addicts, Rooney didn't die young. He lived to 93, but the decades of substance abuse left scars. His health was often poor, his finances unstable, and his relationships strained. The public saw him as a beloved icon, but those close to him knew a man constantly battling his demons. He admitted in interviews that he made many mistakes and struggled with addiction and regret. Rooney was a child star who survived long enough to see the full arc of Hollywood life, from the rise, the fall, to the slow reckoning. But his longevity doesn't erase the damage. The drugs and the lifestyle shaped much of his adult life, and even in his later years, he was haunted by the consequences of choices made decades earlier. Jane Russell. Jane Russell was one of the most recognizable pinups of the 1940s and 1950s. Discovered by Howard Hughes and thrust into stardom with The Outlaw, she was sold to the public as the ultimate Hollywood's bombshell. But beneath the glamorous surface was a quieter, more private battle with substance dependence that followed her for decades. Russell struggled with insomnia and anxiety for much of her adult life. Long shooting schedules, studio demands, and the relentless expectations of stardom left her physically and emotionally exhausted. Doctors prescribed barbiturates to help her sleep. Alcohol soon became another crutch. These habits were common in the industry and often encouraged by studio physicians. While Russell's battles didn't make headlines the way others did, the impact on her health was real. Years of using barbiturates and alcohol took a toll on her body, contributing to health problems later in life. The glamorous image she presented to the world masked a dependence that completely shaped her private life. Although she didn't spiral publicly and she didn't die young, she carried the weight of those substances' consequences for decades. When she died in 2011 at age 89 from respiratory failure, it was the end of a long life, marked by both extraordinary fame and a silent struggle with the same pressures that broke so many others. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars. Known as the Sweater Girl, she defined 1940s sex appeal and starred in some of the era's biggest films. But her personal life was far messier. The polished image was only an upfront. A world of scandal, tragedy, and substance use was her reality for decades. Turner turned to stimulants like amphetamines and later cocaine to keep up with her demanding schedule. The drugs gave her energy and helped her maintain the relentless pace expected of a top-billed star. But they also deepened the chaos in her life. Turner's romantic relationships were volatile, and her name was constantly in the headlines. The most infamous moment came in 1958 when her daughter Cheryl stabbed Turner's abusive boyfriend Johnny Stompanato to death. The sensational trial revealed just how unstable Turner's private world had become. The stress of scandal, combined with drug use, eroded Turner's health and reputation. Over the years, her dependence on pills and stimulants became harder to hide. Her career slowed and her public appearances grew less frequent. By the time she died in 1995 at 75, she was a shadow of the star she had once been. The golden age of Hollywood may look glamorous in old photos, However, all the glittering lights and red carpets were just for the screen. In reality, it was a brutal system that devoured many of its brightest stars. Fame came with impossible demands. Stars had to face relentless shooting schedules, image control, and constant pressure to stay perfect. Studios handed out drugs like candy, using morphine, amphetamines, barbiturates, and cocaine to keep actors working, then sedatives to knock them out at night. Addiction became an invisible part of the contract they signed. The industry created stars, squeezed them dry, and discarded them when their bodies or minds broke and didn't deliver what they signed up for. It didn't matter if they were heartthrobs, bombshells, or legends. The system's grip was ruthless. The truth about vintage Hollywood isn't the glamorous fairy tale we're often shown. Behind the silver screen, the real story was far darker. Now that you've seen the dark side of vintage Hollywood, which of these stories shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. As you know, we'd love to know your thoughts. If you want more unfiltered Hollywood history, don't forget to subscribe so you never get to miss stories like this. And if you found this eye-opening, make sure to like and share this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.